Hi, good evening, everyone. This is one of those spontaneous days where I have got two great speakers with me, Shankara and Joachim, and we are just going to talk about where we are now in the pandemic. What are the implications of the news that is coming out? Because a lot of people are getting distracted by Anthony Fauci and what he's done, and David Morins, but at the end of the day, we still have sick people who are struggling and we have ongoing viral circulation. So before I start, just a reminder for everyone that coming out soon is the secrets of nitric oxide. Look in the description below. We think this will be of great value to everyone looking at all aspects of nitric oxide. So let's get straight into it. And I'll just ask my guests here, starting off probably with Joachim. Why don't you just do a quick introduction of yourself so the audience knows who you are?
Yes, my name is Joachim Gerlach. I'm a German citizen, and I've been working since it's now we're in the seventh years, isn't it? Since January 2020, on any aspect of COVID, acute COVID infection, spike protein-related damages, and I have set up several companies in diagnostics and dietary supplements, and many research labs around the world. We are collaborating, and together with you guys, we have also the RAPID collaboration. It's a Research Alliance for Post-Infectious Disease, where we have formed a formidable group of doctors, scientists, and other experts in the field that have contributed significantly to the understanding of the disease and to the different therapies that have been proven very successful right now. So that's welcome everybody.
Thank you. And Shankara?
I'm a GP from Port Edward, South Africa, and I took the time to treat COVID. I have a natural science background and understood the pathophysiologic process behind it, so I managed to make an impact on treating the disease itself. I've been acknowledged by the university of my training as an expert COVID faculty, and so I present myself here for some advice for those that require it.
Excellent. So listen, just to mention to people, if you share where you are in the world, I will put it up on the screen. Here we have somebody who is from Italy. Oh, sorry, that one, not that one. There we go. And I'll share where you are. So please join in, ask questions, and we will try and address any issues. So I think where I want to start is the fact that I know Joachim and Shankara, you guys have been talking about where the pandemic originated for a long time. And Shankara, certainly for you, you were, well, there still has a court case up against you because of some of the things you said that were treated as misinformation at the time. Do you have any sense of vindication at this point?
Yes, I do, Philip. Look, with the case itself, two things that have emerged recently was the diffuse proposal, and as well the diaries of Fauci and his involvement in the pandemic itself. But from my case and the witness lineup that I have, this information was available 3.5 years ago. So I wonder why it is being pushed out now. Is Fauci a scapegoat, and is this a limited hangout to satisfy those of us that are curious enough to know that what we were told was not really the truth? And so, yeah, it has great impact on my case. But the case has no relevance, Philip, if it doesn't impact on public perception. And that is where the problem lies.
And what about you, Joachim? Because you have been working with people like Charles Rixey and so on. What are your thoughts?
I mean, of course it is good to see that this information is out, and you even see on the White House website the lab leak theory, and that this is now being established as the most probable likely origin of SARS-CoV-2, and the clear involvement of US institutions like EcoHealth Alliance, like Ralph Baric, and Anthony Fauci, and so that the financing was coming from them. And all this is now coming out into the open mainstream knowledge. So that is a good thing to happen, to start with. We were aware of the possibility that it comes from a lab very early on, like directly in the first days when we saw the pictures from China. We did that research, and then there came this famous paper from India, from Assam, where they had this uncanny similarities with HIV, and that paper had to be was forcefully retracted. But from that day on, our groups were working practically day and night on the publicly available gain of function literature that was out there. There were some people next to Charles that were publishing a lot of this work. And in order, if you want to do countermeasures to a spike protein or a virus, and you don't take into account what has been inserted there, let's not speculate why they did it, but just it is making the virus more infectious. It is increasing the danger potential by far. And all these inserts are not to be found. You can't find them in any other coronaviruses. So that is, of course, important to know if you want to work on countermeasures, and you have to understand all the pathways, how it is entering into immune cells, what is the amyloidogenic part of it, and so on. We can get later to all the angles of what has been done there. And so for us, that was no surprise. And later on, we met up with Charles Rixey in 2022, and that was like an incredible meeting, because our group and Charles' group, we met, and we found out that we were working on exactly the same mechanisms and exactly the same problems, and trying to solve them. And that was a very interesting meeting. Of course, you can imagine we have a mighty good time for many hours, like going through all that and finding out that we were working pretty much exactly on the same angles here. That was a very pleasant experience.
One of the things that I don't think people quite grasp is the fact that this virus is behaving in a way that I don't think I can think of another virus that has this kind of capability. Not even when we talk about HIV and the capability of HIV. Yes, it can wipe out the immune system, but this thing can do so much more. Immune damage, microbiome damage, organ damage, autoimmune damage. It is like the perfect beast of a virus. How do you help people, Shankara, to grasp how significant it is that this thing is still circulating?
I think, Philip, we're sitting with a problem. We know that the virus was lab engineered. The focus on the illness itself created a lot of controversy, and which led to the production of a controversial vaccine. So you're sitting with a cohort of patients where you have some vaccinated, some unvaccinated, but everyone getting repeated infections. The vaccinated spike levels are slowly waning over time, but those in unvaccinated are increasing simply because you're getting more and more COVID infections, and we're not testing it. Now, what we're finding is we're not having the same severe immune dysregulation like we did a week after the initial infection in the first three waves, but we are having milder immune issues uh, across the board, but far milder than we had in the first three variants. So, what has changed is that we no more see that severe dysregulation where we can time it and address it aggressively. We are seeing a far milder immune dysregulation, and that is persistent for a far longer period. So, the virus doesn't have the potential to harm you like it did immediately, but it does have the cumulative potential with reinfection to shorten your lifespan. And that
But
is where the
to be
problem lies, and we're not looking
coming
at it.
coming in there, Shankara, and I'm gonna to ask Joachim this point because he was doing some work as well on the Omicron variants. But listen, what I am seeing is that patients seem to be getting a mild viral infection. It appears mild. Then 3 weeks down the line, they have a major hospital event. And there is no connection between the viral infection and this significant event. And so it appears that the virus is mild. When we look at that, Joachim, because you guys were looking at some of this work in one of the papers that you had here And this one is looking at the proposed mechanism for reduce severe COVID severity, but not necessarily reduce severity of disease.
I mean, the whole problem that we're facing in the current narrative is as follows. Since January 2022, when Omicron came up, you even had people in Europe here getting infected on purpose because they thought, it's mild, and now I get my certificate for IgG antibodies, and I'm free again to move around. So from that moment on until today, there is the idea that Omicron is harmless, and there is a reason why people think that, and it is, and that is actually more in Shankara's turf. So any variant from the Wuhan wild type until anything until the end of 2021, which were all these hot variants, as we want to call them, they seem to have a trigger on the spike that was causing these severe hypersensitivity reactions, be it affecting the mast cells, other immune cells, or other, let's say, hypersensitivity overreactions from the organism. That's what Shankara was treating. That's why he was so successful in the first waves of this severe virus. And so when that disappears, then the idea is, the virus is not so dangerous anymore because I don't see these acute symptoms and these acute disease expressions. And so now it's harmless. And that is, of course, a miscalculation, because we have published not only that paper, we published also a follow-up paper where we were comparing all the stuff that we talked about today, that what happened in gain of function, what are the specific gain of function mechanisms that are now embedded into the spike. And then if you then compare wild type and anything pre-Omicron with Omicron spike protein, you find that they're still in there, and some of them are even enhanced. Furet cleavage works better. Then we have all these amyloidogenic epitopes, which will cause all the microclots and all the neurological, let's say, they're not really beneficial in the brain to have amyloidogenic fibers accumulating and creating all kind of stuff. Then you have the DC sign binding, which is that is very similar to an HIV-like behavior, because that will enable the spike protein and the virus to affect immune cells directly, transfect them, infect them. Then you have the super antigen motif, which is clearly, let's say, the super antigens were in the 60s, they were part of the bioweaponry arsenal. A super antigen is a bioweapon by definition. Then you have prion-like domains where we don't have so much data yet. We're still looking at, but they are certainly still present in there. And then you have this crazy behavior of SARS-CoV-2 to be able to infect and replicate in our bacteria, which no other coronavirus can do. And that is, of course, an enhancement. That is gain of function, because you are gaining access to a new reservoir in the organism where the virus can replicate and cause damage.
This as I said, this is some pretty serious stuff. And Shankara, who do you think needs to grasp this most? Is it the governments and the health agencies? Is it clinicians? Or is it just the general public? Where should people, or where should the pressure or the knowledge be placed in order to try and understand this better?
Look, Philip, we've been through the pandemic. We've seen the responses of government. It didn't make a difference. It was nonsensical. They didn't follow the science. We ended up with measures that damaged society more than it actually protected society. And now we sit with business closures and the rest, public health interventions. When we look at the scientific community that managed the pandemic, there was a lot of nefarious things happening, publications that were wrong, publications that were published, that were expanded to the public, and then were quietly withdrawn to give false perspectives. So we've seen a tarnishing of the scientific community. We've seen doctors follow protocols, not willing to think outside the box and actually treat patients according to what they saw. They followed the so-called experts of the world in just instituting protocols that they never questioned. And all this harmed the public. So at the end of the day, yes, we can make a difference if we uh, change government regulations and the approach, which I see as almost impossible. We can change the way the scientific community looks at science in future pandemics so that we can get the information that we need. Unfortunately, we see capture there as well and influence there as well. We can try and retrain the medical fraternity as to what's truly going on so that we get a higher level of competence as to what truly is going on with human physiology. But unfortunately, we got the regulatory authorities and the rest that have taken 5 years to admit that there's a problem. And so we got also the egos of doctors that have forced the vaccine on people. So I think the only avenue we truly have to make a dent in the death and disability that will follow is to educate the public that there is still a circulating lab manipulated virus that has long term consequences. And the way I do that, Philip, is to make sure that every patient of mine that comes in with an infection, whether it's COVID or not, I make sure that timeously they are back to 100% health. Nothing must persist, nothing must worsen, and you want to be back to 100% of what you were prior to getting that infection. We are seeing cumulative effects of repeated infection. And so the only way for me to prevent it is to make sure that you are 100% recovered before we can get to the next infection. What's happening is people are not recovering completely and getting another infection. So they're losing a percentage of health with each infection. And so after 3 or 4 infections, you're not the same person you were before the first one. So it becomes important to treat people timelessly and completely.
As you were saying that, Shankara, I'd selected one of the comments here that I wanted Joachim to talk to, because this is where the connection comes between the reinfection and the cumulative impact. And this is someone was asking from Ireland about what tests can be done to establish whether or not they have spike protein infiltrating human cells, whether it was from COVID or the vaccine. Joachim, this is where a lot of your work is. What is your statement on this?
Yeah, so if you go for blood samples, be it capillary blood with a blood prick test like we have here, this is a spike test, so you can see if you have circulating spike in your blood, or you take a real blood sample in a vial and you send it to a laboratory like the MMD lab in Germany. There you can get a clear quantification and a selective, let's say, a real clear diagnostic test, so that you can see how much spike you have in your circulating in your bloodstream. Much of that spike, of course, that people have is embedded into cells, endothelial cells and other organs. But yeah, so what we measure at the moment is circulating spike. We did a spike challenge in Germany. We are now running over 700 results. That means doctors took randomly, also asymptomatic, try to be representative in their selection of people. And we found with 700 samples around about 66% of the population were testing positive for circulating spike protein. That means spike protein that is circulating cannot do that for long, because the spike protein has a high affinity to bind to our cells. That is its function. The spike is the hook to our cells to bring in the virus. So it cannot circulate long. So if we find circulating spike, we have an active ongoing spike production for sure. We're pretty sure about that. So if you see that the general population at the moment is around 66%, at least in Germany at the moment, in this cohort, there's many asymptomatic, a lot of unvaccinated also in these cohorts. We can go deeper into the data and then see who's more symptomatic, who's sicker, etc., etc. But as a ballpark figure, almost 2/3 of the population are walking around at this current 2026 first 2 quarters with productive spike persistence in their organism.
And so, Shankara, when you look at numbers like that, what does it make you think?
Philip, we're sitting, like I said from the start, this is going to become an environmental toxin. there's almost no way to avoid it. There's too many reservoirs. We're dealing with a highly contagious virus that we do not develop robust immunity to, so repeated infections are going to be common. So we're going to have to figure out some novel ways to actually deal with this. Yes, one is to negate the effects of every infection to make sure you don't end up with the cumulative damage. I think the second is that we see some phenotypic differences in population in the way they respond. So some people have more neurologic symptoms, some people have more clotting issues, and I think those need to be investigated. I kept mentioning blood groups and genetic testing to see who's more prone to certain things, and I think that will give us an idea of going forward who's at high risk of having these problems. But we haven't separated this cohort out at all, simply because there's been a lack of acceptance that the circulating virus is still detrimental to human health. And so we've ignored it. And now we sit with this kind of problem. So, yeah, there's going to be there needs a lot of research to be done for us to understand further so that we can be a bit more predictive than reactive in the way we're treating this.
I
Reactive,
think
Philip, is
Mhm.
leading to problems.
I'm just thinking that there are many people who were against the vaccine, who spoke out against the vaccine. But in a sense, they're making a huge mistake by assuming that infection is mild. Do we have to be careful not to become too ideologically tied to any particular thing? I think actually this is one I'd love to hear Joachim talk about, where we are almost becoming ideologically connected to ideas that therefore take us away from the science. Any thoughts, Joachim?
Absolutely, that's the biggest problem. The biggest problem currently is not the science. The biggest problem is not the proof. The biggest problem is not what can be done about this, find the right therapy and diagnostics. The biggest problems are narratives. Narratives, as we have seen during the pandemic, ideological, political, geopolitical, monetary interests, any kind of narrative is completely counterproductive to solid science. So the problem is that me personally, I'm in between all of these groups. I don't get along well with the mainstream, and I don't get along well with the so-called vaccine opponents or the people that are very critical and rightfully critical about the vaccines. But they think if we talk about the virus, we are helping the agenda that was pushed in the first 2 years and create panic from the virus to push the vaccine, which has happened, of course. Well, we don't push vaccines. We say, hey, just the vaccine was a bad idea, but just be careful with the virus as well. And so the problem is originating from another fact. And this fact is now becoming very clear because it's not only that Anthony Fauci, as head of I forget the letter, the agency,
NIAID.
NIAID, was not only responsible for funding, conducting, and pushing along to create, let's say, weapon-ready chimeric viruses in China with the help of US institutions. He was also responsible for the public response in the US. So that means he was not only involved in making that virus, he was also involved on the reaction and the policy of lockdowns, mask wearing, medications, like what Shankara was experiencing, that you couldn't treat these people. The only solution was then an mRNA vaccine. So he was prominently involved in all this at the same time. And this is the mind-blowing fact. Yeah. So I understand that people are now extremely cautious with any narrative. So that's why I try to come up with always with data, explain the mechanisms, help people to understand what's going on without creating panic, and provide solutions. We have to get out of this hellhole of different narratives and this disaster that we're facing at the moment.
Yeah, one of the problems is I don't envy public health at the moment because their issue is going to be that they are going to be so cautious about what they say next because there is such a fracture with the public. But we're now going into a really dangerous territory where nobody seems to have the responsibility, nobody seems to have the direction, and it is now left up to the public to just do as they please. Shankara, is that more dangerous? Do we have an even worse situation when the public don't trust public health?
I think we do, Philip. Uh, Everyone that had a hand in the direction of the pandemic, be it either in the creation of the virus or the response to the pandemic, every single one of them that had their hand in that should be held responsible and accountable for what's happened. But everyone seems to be claiming the fifth to protect themselves. So I can't understand why you stood up and directed the world in that direction. And now, when we ask for questions, you claim the fifth, that you're going to implicate yourself in an answer. That proves that there is some criminality that was involved. When you talk of Fauci, Fauci created the problem and then was given the job of managing the problem, and nobody knew he had created the problem. So now that he sits in Senate hearings and claims the fifth, when are we going to get to figure out how this actually happened? And with the narratives, Philip, I think there's been a conflation of what true science actually is. We talk about the vaccine and its effects, and whether the vaccine was effective or not, and everyone was claiming different percentages. But understand, as a doctor, the first patient I saw that had COVID after having the vaccine a month ago proved to me that the vaccine doesn't work. It took one patient to prove the vaccine's ineffective.
Yeah.
Why do we need 20,000 people to prove that? So there were a lot of things that happened in the pandemic that could have sped up our response. As soon as I saw that a patient that had a vaccine a month later picked up a COVID infection, clearly that should have been taken into consideration that the vaccine is ineffective. But they wanted to hide all that science, and so they've created the distrust in the public itself. So for public to trust again, we've got to have true scientists out there that understand and provide data. Everyone wants to seem to jump on the bandwagon to blow their own horn. People are saying viruses don't exist. People are saying that COVID never existed. People are saying that it's a mild passing illness. I'm unvaccinated, Philip. I have no chronic conditions. And on the eighth day with Omicron, twice for the first time in my life, ended up in ICU. So if someone thinks there wasn't a virus and the virus is not dangerous, can you please explain to me how I ended up in ICU twice? If you can do that, I'll say there's no virus. But me ending up in ICU twice as a person that's never seen the inside of a hospital other than as a doctor, something was wrong. I'd like someone to explain it to me.
That's a very
Or
important point. Yeah. A really important point because I see all of these conversations all the time. There's no virus, there's no pandemic. And I'm thinking to myself, how in the world do we fix this mess? So when we think about data, Joachim, as I was reflecting on what Shankara was saying, explain what this means because it's in German.
Yeah, so this is what from our survey that the rate of spike positivity is higher in the elderly, and the younger ones are a little better off. So you see the 38, so the 20 to 29-year-old are like below 40%, and the let's say are starting at 40 to 49, they're already almost double, twice as high. So that is one finding we had. That's just a data point. It's 700. But if you go to the slide below that, then it gets really interesting, because if we want to assess the situation and talk about what could be done from the point of view of the public health institutions in their response, from the guild of doctors, and from our side, what we can do about this. So where are we standing? So the current question was, for example, between 2025 and 2026, do we see an increase? Is it getting worse or is it getting better? But it seems that there were some variants on the way last year that have a much longer persistence in the body, and that the spike production is now twice as bad as it was last year. So 2025, if you look at these bars, the blue bars are the data from 2025. We are looking here at 9,286 blood samples that went to the MMD laboratory from different doctors and clinics. And MMD is looking for spike in patient blood. So you can see 3 compartments: free spike in the serum plasma. In the middle, you have spike in exosomes, which is clearly showing that there is an ongoing spike synthesis in a cell. And the spike, like they did with the vaccine, that can also happen with the virus, the spike is in an exosome, in a little lipid nanoparticle, so to speak, and gets into circulation. And then on the right 2 bars are spike presence in immune cells, like what Bruce Patterson was finding in macrophages, monocytes, and other immune cells. So as it is varying between patients, some have more in the immune cells, others have more free. We took all 3 data points, and if you look at it, you have roughly a doubling in spike positivity rates in the last 12 months. Yeah, so it's at the opposite of what we should expect by now in the 6 years of the pandemic, in the 6th year of the pandemic. So that is not a good news. The question is, what can be now the implications in the overall health of people? And we can get to that a little later. I sent you 2 publications that Shankara was also part with me in publishing. One is on the shadow population, and another one is on capillary reinfection and tissue destruction through the presence of spike protein, especially if it's over prolonged periods. But very quickly, as an end to this, so if you want to be able, and if you want to enable doctors and therapists that are not familiar with long COVID conditions and post-vac conditions, what they need to get at hand is, first of all, a diagnostic panel that is different from the normal panels they are using right now. Because we have plenty of patients, they come back with a diagnostic panel from their doctor, cardio, whatever. Hey, I'm fine, everything, all data looks good. But if you would look with our different panels and look at the different markers, the big picture would be completely different. If you measure spike, you measure microthrombi, you measure certain inflammatory markers, you measure certain neuromarkers, then you would start to distinguish patients that are sick and where the doctors and practitioners and clinics have no clue that this is coming from spike. That is the biggest problem. Second is then the training of these doctors, because we have certain channels and we have certain institutions like Rapid. We do training for doctors and practitioners and therapists. And this is a serious, and you do, Philip. So you know yourself, how long does it take to take a good medical doctor that is not familiar with long COVID to make him understand the roughly now 1,000 different pathways that can be in this regulation in these patients, and how to go about it, in which following order, and how to
Yeah,
treat them. That's the
it is
problem.
it is a huge challenge, and yes, you're right. I'm trying to see if I can pick apart what I think is a framework for clinicians to think about. And this is, in GPs, like what Shankar is saying, it's seeing one spectrum of it. These are the chronically ill ones who keep on coming back. And then you have in hospitals, you have some really complicated, unusual disease presentation. And if spike is not a part of your differential, it literally just makes no sense. And so we are really at a crossroads. And the hard part is that there is no clear protocol that will direct the clinical community. And I think that what they are doing is what we have done many times when we hear things like functional disease, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue. Before the pandemic, these would just be ignored. And so we would walk the other way and pass it on to someone else. We cannot afford to do that at this point, because I just got this comment here. You cannot trust hospitals. How do we get any real treatment with illness when everything is tainted? Shankara, what do you say? You're muted, Shankara.
Yeah, Philip, I think I said this before. We call it the medical fraternity. The medical fraternity is here to protect patients and to treat patients. So I guess we're going to have to redefine who the true medical fraternity actually is. At the end of the day, patients' rights were trampled on. I've seen that here in South Africa for many years, Philip, with medical insurances and medical aids dictating which doctor a patient is allowed to see and which doctor a patient isn't allowed to see. But that goes against a patient's freedom to choose in whose lives they're willing to put their hands in and who they're willing to trust. So at the end of the day, the lack of trust in doctors is going to result in patients gravitating to those that they truly trust. And doctors that have made mistakes to rebuild trust will have to acknowledge that there has been these mistakes, not try and scapegoat it and find ways to blame other people. Everyone needs to take responsibility for what they've done. Then we'll rebuild trust. If that trust is not rebuilt, we need a completely new framework for a system of healthcare that builds public trust. What we've lost, we're not going to regain. So if the system has broken, it has broken itself because of the mistrust, and the mistrust comes from the way the system is structured. So it's a redesign or a restructure of the entire medical system to make sure that it serves people, not commercial interests.
Yeah, quite true. And again, Joachim, here was a point here. So is the S protein, the spike protein, reproducing internally without external transmission? And again, the question is this primarily in the vaccinated, unvaccinated, or what? Any thoughts on that, Joachim? You're muted at the moment.
And not only thoughts, it's a lot of data, but I don't know, we don't have that all at hand here today. But to clarify, in the SARS-CoV-2 virus, when it infects cells, it enters the cell and it builds not only SARS-CoV, other coronaviruses do that as well. It builds a little bunker or several bunkers, like membrane, they call them DMVs, double membrane vesicles. And there, this virus puts its RNA, DNA, and it's there like guarded. And then the virus can disappear. So you will not find active replicable virus anymore, but you have now the RNA information stored in these bunkers and phased out in smaller amounts and then synthesized into spike. That is not my opinion. You can watch it under the atomic force microscopy. And so, and that seems what we are measuring. So we are still lacking funding for more research to find out, for example, which variant is the spike from. So we can distinguish between spike from the vaccine and spike from the virus, because the vaccine spike has certain inserts. So from the virus, you can have an ongoing production. You can have also an ongoing spike synthesis and production from the vaccine. That's Carlo has measured that. He's in our group, and other people have measured it, and it looks like it can be anywhere between 6 months or even a year and a half or 2 years. But the amount of spike that's produced seems to go down now with time, as is the number of people that get vaccinated, fortunately. So we don't know if there's a reverse transcription. That is, nobody has yet come up with a proof that a transfected cell from the vaccine has a reverse transcribed RNA into its DNA and then produce, like a retrovirus, produce spike protein. That would be a disaster. We can get to these cells. We can eliminate these cells. It is possible to do something about it, both viral origin or spike from the vaccine. In these ongoing productive cells, we can get to them. It was pretty easy until the last quarter of 2025. We could get practically across the board, we could get spike down with certain dietary supplements or certain molecules. Then it got more difficult, and there were some cohorts that would not react anymore to the established sequencing of senolytics and other compounds, and they would not go down. Their spike levels would remain. And it cost us 6 to 8 months of sleepless nights to find a solution. And now finally, we see these resistant cohorts all go down again. So we are now very grateful that we can address this problem in the patients. So to get out the spike that is coming from productive cell, it cannot circulate for longer than maximum a day. It's actually only minutes to hours. Spike cannot circulate forever. It needs to be replenished. It gets to the cells and gets in there. That's another problem we can talk later. Maybe what is happening then to the spike that disappears into the tissue on top of everything.
Yeah, so these are big questions, and I think Shankara, as Joachim was talking, one of these points came in. So just to make the audience aware, I am looking at the points and the questions that you're making. Here is a point from Ruth in Toronto. And this is what is the reality now for patients is that she's in Toronto in her 60s. They are now asking people who are now chronically ill if they want to have MAID. MAID is technically euthanasia. I've forgotten what the MAID stands for. Canada is one of the few countries in the world that is significantly leading with this, and it's becoming more and more relevant for people who are really struggling with chronic disease. And any thoughts as we are likely to see an increase in this kind of pattern?
I think, Philip, with what we're seeing around the world, there is an increased disease burden, right? When you look at that program, it is an assisted suicide program, right? And we're going to see more and more people go down that road, not solely because of the illness itself, but also the economic pressure that's been put on society because of what happened during the COVID pandemic. There's a lot of other fears and factors and stresses that come into it. But to institute such a program, I think, is immoral. Yes, people do die, and as the doctor, I make those choices to make sure that I make them as comfortable as possible. But I do not assist them in that process. I do not help them die when there's a chance that a miracle might save their life. I think that's faith. So now we're sitting with a with an issue where people have become despondent. There's a lot of depression. There's a lot of all those other psychiatric illnesses going around, and now we provide them with this option to say, "Fine, uh, there you can take your own life." I think I've read many articles, Philip, where people made that decision and changed their minds at the last minute, and actually had to were forced to go through the process. So when it comes to that kind of thing, I don't think, and I think as well, there's a children can make the choice today if they wanted that kind of facility available to them. So I think yeah, there's a big agenda at play, and it's all about creating disease and death, and not actually doing anything to save humanity. They're assisting people die. What more can we say? Is that the job of a doctor?
Yeah, I mean, these are serious points, and based on the trajectory of illness. And Joachim, I want you to talk to this slide here because this is probably the most serious bit of data that is coming out. Explain to the audience what is happening here, Joachim.
I'm like you know me now since years. I've been pleading since early 2022 to take the virus serious, yeah, on top of what the vaccine is doing, because if we don't, we will see more and more people that get so sick, like the ones you were just describing, that would then go into assisted suicide because they are suffering so badly that and nobody can really get them out of that state anymore. They become pretty much untreatable. So but nobody gets into that state from one day to another. And this is a very small fraction of what we call the shadow population, which is around, my guess would be around 12, maybe 15% of the general population in the Western countries like the US and Europe. So that's a large part of the population. And now they are exposed to continuous ongoing waves of Omicron infection. And so I went here and I looked at the literature again and I did a clear review out of that. So your first COVID infection, you have a chance of around, so this is cases of long COVID with one or more sequelae per 100,000 infected. So roughly 10%. They don't stay in that state, all of them. Some of them recover. But the second one, if you then get a second time infected, your chances of developing long COVID symptoms is already more than double, more twice as high. So you are looking at 26% of the second wave infected people having one or more symptom or sequelae. And then it plateaus off a little bit with the third one. But can you imagine? We have never had as many Omicron infections like in the last few years. And the viral load and the load of spike protein, as you've seen with our data, is much higher than before. So this needs to be addressed. You cannot just shrug it off and say, no problem. You can see with this data, and I can show you more and more data on all this metadata from all different institutions, immunodeficiency, co-infections, neurological symptoms, clotting, cardiovascular, everything goes through the roof and nobody looks at it and nobody wants to take it serious. That is the problem.
It's sadly, one of the things I'm starting to realize is that if we could find a way for big pharma, not this, I know you guys are working on solutions, Joachim, but imagine if one of the big pharmaceutical companies suddenly had a product that could help with regards to managing these symptoms. Suddenly, just like what we saw recently with the Moderna cancer vaccine, it would suddenly be pushed out there as the solution. It's the way to save everybody at a huge cost. Would it be worth it? Suppose, let me just put that to you, Joachim. Imagine if one of the big pharma companies came to you now and said, listen, give us what you have, we'll give you a good payoff for it, but we will then get governments to get it out there and get people to be protected more effectively. What would your answer to them be?
Why would I trust them? They were involved in creating the virus. They were involved in getting the response done. They were involved in making the vaccine. They're involved right now to capitalize on the ongoing immunodeficiency with the development of more than 30 mRNA vaccines against shingles, measles, you just name it. So any kind of pathogen that is now coming up because of the immunodeficiency they created in the first place, now they have mRNA vaccines like they do with the cancer vaccine. So why would I talk to these people ever?
Yeah, quite right. And Shankara, any thoughts? If they're coming to you now and saying, "Okay, Shankara, help us to put this together and find solutions for people." What do you say?
I'd say give me the money and I'll find the solution myself. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to trust them to find the solution, and I'm not going to allow them access to the work that we've done because we've had to do it under strict censorship. We've had to do it behind covers. Now, I don't want someone that's been preventing me from helping people coming to me under the false pretense that they want to help people. They will take the work that we've done and hide it away. They will make sure that they negate the benefit we might have achieved. I don't trust them at all.
Yeah, we are really at a huge crossroads, before I come into that, because we're coming up to our hour mark where we'll close out. But there was a question that I had starred here, Joachim, for you, which is please discuss levels of spike versus levels of antibody. You guys are measuring spike, but not necessarily antibody. Any reason for that?
Yes, because we can. And in many in the US and in other countries don't have access to spike laboratories or to spike testing as we do. We are changing that, as you know, we speak. But so that means the next best marker I can use is, of course, IgG antibodies. But you have to be careful there because you have different antibodies, and I don't know if they really differentiate between IgG 1, 2, 3, and 4. And also, you can see that there is a not a clear correlation with current spike levels and current IgG levels because of different variants playing in. We have published that as well on all the antibody evasiveness and the immune dysregulation. So you cannot trust it. You can't say I have high IgG levels, so I have to have high spike levels. It can be an ongoing, perpetuating pumping out of antibodies, still even after the antigen is gone. So it's better. It's very simple. Why would you measure a secondary marker if you can measure the real antigen itself and quantify it?
Yeah, excellent answer. Yes. So one of the things that you had also highlighted, Joachim, but I'd like Shankara's thought on this, is this rise in Candida auris. Now, I say this because this is in the paper that you had shared with us, Joachim. But if you look carefully at the news, what you will notice is that we are also having massive rises in measles. They think it's because suddenly a few people were unvaccinated. We're seeing cyclospora, there is meningitis, there's salmonella, all happening at the same time. Shankara, do you think this is more to do with the fact that the population is immune suppressed?
Most definitely, Philip. Most definitely. We are, if you look at the trajectory, you can see an exponential rise since 2020, 2021, in all these opportunistic infections. Now, I treat a lot of HIV patients. I've got thousands of patients with HIV, and I monitor them and I monitor their CD4 counts and their immune status. And of course, in all my patients, managing them very well, they don't pick up these opportunistic infections very easily. But those with suppressed immune function always will come in with candida, mycoplasma. There's a whole range of opportunistic infections. And that is a clear diagnostic criteria to show that the rise in opportunistic infections correlates to decreasing immune function. So, what we're seeing there, if you're looking at it population wise, is we're seeing a population wide immunosuppression. And if you look at not only Candida, Philip, if you look at mycoplasma, the pneumonias, all those kind of opportunistic infections where previously we were able to have to have fought it with competent immunity, all those are becoming more and more prevalent. So we're getting a population-wide immune suppression. So the outbreak of measles, all those things that we're seeing are likely to be because of immune suppression. People jumped up and said it's because of the lack of the lack of measles vaccination. But remember, the children that didn't have the measles vaccine were likely to pick up measles, but not spread it as an epidemic to those who were already vaccinated. So it's a small cohort so far of people that have not taken the measles vaccine. A majority have. So if you're telling me that now, because of the not taking of a measles vaccine in the last year or two, it's created a measles epidemic, it tells me the measles vaccine didn't really work in the first place because the majority of the people that are getting measles had the vaccine. So I think they're conflating data and they're trying to find a narrative and trying to push the vaccines, find ways to show that stopping the vaccine had some detrimental effect. Philip, chickenpox and measles, when I was a kid, we had chickenpox and measles parties. We were not afraid of it. When one person got it, we had a party and got all the children to get it at once. It is a mild childhood illness and it gives you lifelong immunity, God given lifelong immunity. Why did we have to go tamper with that? Now you're giving children chickenpox and measles vaccinations. What you are actually deferring, it is not a sterilizing vaccine. So you are deferring the measles and the chickenpox to later on in their lives. And deferring it to later in their lives makes it a far more severe illness. It is a mild illness in children, it's a severe illness in adulthood. And previously, we encouraged all children to get it and get over with it. And the immunity they got was lifelong. Why now a vaccine? And the vaccine is only postponing your ability to pick up a natural infection and get lifelong immunity, which then exposes you to a more severe illness because you're getting it later in your life. So I can't understand that the vaccines don't make any sense. And now, with using mRNA technology that has been proven to be disastrous, changing all the vaccines to mRNA technology, you're creating even more of a problem. So I would be one of those doctors to advise my patients not to take any vaccines until we can prove that it doesn't have mRNA in it and it's safe. They haven't proven anything otherwise. And so until the science is proven and proven to be safe, as a doctor, I'm going to take two steps back.
These are challenging times, and when it comes to, it's only in the COVID pandemic that I have started to look broadly at vaccines. But I think one of the points that you made there, which is something that I had never looked at before, is that there are three ways the measles virus works. One, it has to get through mucosal immunity. Two, it then has to pass through systemic immunity. And three, it has to get out of the immune system in the lungs. And so there are 3 points that you have immunity. And so, therefore, an injectable vaccine can't ever be as effective as natural infection. However, for children who are probably at high risk for complications, there is certainly a place. It's just that we have so much more work to do to understand. We're coming. Yes, go ahead, Joachim.
One quick call to action. Look, very simple. We have published peer-reviewed, maybe not in the highest class journal, but it is there peer-reviewed, and the data is interesting, not if we are in a high-impact journal that look at the data. So my call would be to the HHS secretary and to NIH Bhattacharya to look at the current level of immunodeficiency or loss of immunocompetence, especially in children, because of the bacteriophage behavior and the dysbiosis and the infection, direct infection, and the cluster bombing on the immune cells going all the way up into the stem cells. We talked about all that. So all mechanisms how this loss of immunocompetence comes either through COVID mRNA vaccines and or infection are clearly proven. What is missing is the data being taken from the authorities and really look at it and statistically catch the problem, because we see that from kindergartens, we see that from schools. You talk to pediatricians, you see the children that used to be sick once or twice per year are now six, 7 times per year they're ill. So you can tell already that the children are actually the most affected by this loss of immunocompetence, and now they are trying to blame vaccine hesitancy in childhood vaccines for these kind of conditions. This is diabolic. And second, you need to address that. The children have to be treated with whatever brings back their immune system. You have to take out the spike and the coronavirus from the intestines. You have to rebuild the intestines. What Sabine Hayes is saying, bifido, but it's much more than that. Yeah, so that is one thing, and you have to start to bring back the immune systems of these kids, and not blame it on vaccine hesitancy, and not come now with 30 new mRNA shots for the problem that they created in the first place. This is unheard of.
Yes, quite right. As we're coming to the end, and I'll ask you guys to give a summation. And this was a suggestion made by someone, which I think is very true. We need regular discussion with Dr. Shankara and Joachim. And I think that there are so many things to talk about, and there is such a wealth of study among us that I think we should try and do this more regularly, gentlemen. I think this is an important discussion. So as we close out, Joachim, you can probably start. What do you think? Because we have almost 467 people with us at the moment. What is your message to them? And I'll let you go afterwards, Shankara.
Now, whatever help we can get, be it also maybe through donations to the Rapid Research Alliance, whatever data people can provide, whatever participation in the Spike survey we are doing, any help is good, because we are, of course, we don't have the resources like a big corporation. It's all privately funded, what we do. And I would really appreciate if people also look at the publications we are doing to spread the word that we don't want to push any vaccine or any narrative. We just want to show up a problem, and we want to help other groups and ourselves to provide the solutions in solving it. And maybe one more word, what we haven't talked about today. Shankara has a pretty good long COVID protocol, and it can be combined with certain dietary supplements as a flanking measure, so that you can stabilize the patient and prevent them from degrading further, and to help get out the spike and do other things in combination as a pharmaceutical and dietary supplement regime, which I think that we should talk about maybe in a few weeks again when we meet here, because I highly appreciate Shankara's contribution to the whole field. Maybe Shankara, you want to say a few words about your protocol that you're using now and that I really like, and is very promising.
Excellent. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, Philip, through our journey with COVID, we understood the mechanisms. And with Joachim, look, the protocol I use is to reset an a dysregulated immune system, which is the mopping up of cytokines and a steroid to reboot the immune response. That seems to give the patient a lot of benefit. We look at Carlo's protocol to detoxify the gut and restore the microbiome. That's the second phase. So that's where we get the guy with the peanut allergy to spit out the peanut. And then we move on to Joachim's work, where we're trying to remove the spike, detoxify the body, and restore it. So we've come up with a protocol where it takes us from an acutely injured patient, vaccine or long COVID, through the process of healing all the way to restoring reasonable health. That is our goal, and we're investigating it all along the way to see that we are effective. We're not throwing spaghetti at a wall and hoping it will stick. We're doing the research. The problem is, Philip, like we had from the start of the pandemic, we are finding solutions. We are finding ways to help. The problem is the suppression. The problem is the regulation. The problem is that we can't get it to the people that need it. And there's where the rub lies. Censorship and all that is still there. And I think that's the biggest hurdle we actually face. If we
Yeah.
could actually get people to understand that there is a group that is making inroads into solutions, we would that sow a lot of hope, and of course, a lot of people would be able to access the products. When you block access to solutions, uh, people don't know what to do. They left without options. You're blocking the access to solutions, but pushing proposals that don't look like solutions, like vaccines. So I think public health needs a wake up call. At the end of the day, it's for people to rise. It's for people to take care ownership of their own health. At the end of the day, the rules and regulations that govern us are meant to provide us with a better life. They're not supposed to be rules and regulations that prevent us getting access to a better life. And that's
Yeah.
what the world seems to have become. So I'm of the
Yeah.
opinion that the rules and regulations represent the mark of the beast, and if all of us want to do better, please reject them. They dare to test you.
I'd like to add, as I said, as we all come from different angles, my angle is that I focus on the fact that many people have a predisposition for having these manifestations, the inflammatory manifestations. So I go from the angle as well of, can we find those root bits of damage first, address them, resolve it, then fix, then remove. And so it's all along the same line, and it's tremendously encouraging when we all come together and start discussing, because everybody is searching for ways to find solutions for patients. And I think that is probably the most important thing that we all share together, is that we want to help people to get better. So thank
Yeah.
you very much, you all, and I think we should make a commitment that we will speak regularly about ideas, research, what patients are going through, and give the public at least the confidence that there is a future ahead where people are searching for solutions. So thank you, gentlemen, and I hope we speak again soon.
Thank you. Have a nice weekend.
Okay.